I was standing at a busy intersection this morning, watching a young boy weave through the stagnant traffic. He was selling those small paper tricolors for 5 rupees, his face lit up with a kind of genuine, infectious pride as he waved them toward the tinted windows of a sleek, black luxury SUV. The driver rolled his window down just an inch, not to buy a flag, but to spit a thick red stream of pain juice onto the sun-baked asphalt before speeding off into a gray haze of AQI 400 air. It was a quiet, almost perfect snapshot of the modern republic. On the surface, the narrative is one of grand, unstoppable momentum. We talk about overtaking Japan, becoming the world's 3rd largest economy, and our growing global influence. There's a certain giddy excitement in the air when those GDP numbers flash on the news. We see the posters, the hashtags, and the televised parades, and it feels like we've finally arrived. But then you look a little closer at the contradictions. You see the graduate on the street corner, 2 degrees in hand, scrolling through a phone for jobs that don't exist. You notice the diabetes capital of the world title we carry like a grim trophy, or the way safety for women has somehow been reduced to a cycle of candle marches and trending hashtags that fade by the next news cycle. One moment, we are the soaring eagle of the 21st century. The next, we are a nation where the rich thrive in silos while the middle class is squeezed dry and the poor remain trapped in a perpetual struggle. We have principles that are breathtaking on paper, yet a practice that is, for many, excruciating. This gap between the great India we celebrate and the failed republic we inhabit every day is getting harder to ignore. It forces a question that most are too uncomfortable to ask. If the system is crumbling around us, is it because the machinery is broken or because we've forgotten how to run it?
Wow. Powerful, the boy with the flag, the SUV, the spit. It's just so visceral.
It felt like everything in one frame.
And, it's unsettling because it feels so completely familiar. That tension you're describing, that feeling of living in 2 different countries at the same time.
Timelines, yeah.
It isn't just a mood or feeling. It is the defining paradox of all the data we have in front of us today. I'm looking at this stack of reports right here, and it's like they're describing 2 completely different nations that just happen to share the same geography.
It really does feel like a national split personality. I mean, on the one hand, you have the G20 summits, the moon landings, these billionaire weddings that the entire world stops to watch.
The shining India narrative.
Right. And then, on the other hand, you have that scene at the intersection, which is happening a million times a day. But I want to be really clear with everyone listening, right from the start. This deep dive isn't about complaining.
Yeah.
It's not about pessimism or, just bashing the country. It's about diagnostics.
It's the perfect way to frame it. If you have a car that's supposed to be a Ferrari, a high-performance, world-beating machine, but it keeps stalling out and blowing smoke in the driveway.
You don't just kick the tires and yell at it.
You don't. You pop the hood. You get your hands dirty. You look at the engine and you ask the hard questions. Is the fuel line clogged? Is the transmission shot? What is fundamentally wrong with the machinery?
And today, that's what we're doing. We are popping the hood on the Indian Republic. We're going to look past the headlines, past the noise, and really try to understand why this gap you're talking about exists. We're going to diagnose the machinery of the state itself.
And we've sort of broken this down into 3 main areas, right? 3 places where the engine seems to be misfiring most badly.
Right. We're going to start with the collapse of basic state capacity, things like health and the environment. Then we'll get into the illusion or the mirage of the economic boom.
The big GDP numbers, yeah.
And finally, we'll tackle the crisis in what people call human capital, basically the education system.
And I think it's important to say, we're not just going to throw numbers and statistics at you. We're going to look at the human cost of all this. Because when we say a term like state capacity, it sounds so academic.
Very dry.
Yeah, it sounds like something you'd discuss in a seminar room. But for the people actually living through it, it's about survival. It's about their daily life.
Capacity. When the state ghost rides the machine, I've been reading through some of these case studies, and one story in particular really jumped out at me because it felt so representative of the silent majority in our big cities. It's about a young man, let's call him Arjun, living in Delhi.
Okay. Tell us about Arjun.
So Arjun is your classic middle-class driver. He's not an activist. He's not looking for trouble. He has a decent corporate job. He pays his taxes on time. He follows all the rules. He's doing everything he's supposed to do.
The model citizen.
The model citizen. But his daily routine, when you read it, it sounds less like a normal day and more like he's prepping for, a tactical survival mission in a hostile environment.
Yeah.
He wakes up. The first thing he does, before coffee, before checking email, is check his phone for the AQI, the air quality index.
which in Delhi is often in the hazardous category. I mean, that's the official term for it.
Hazardous. It's such a polite clinical way of saying the atmosphere around you is actively trying to kill you. So Arjun puts on an N95 mask indoors.
Inside his own apartment.
Inside his own apartment, just to walk from the bedroom to the kitchen. He's watching his father develop this chronic hacking cough. He's trying to help his dad navigate the local public healthcare system, which he describes as this black hole of paperwork and, empty promises. But the detail, the one thing that really just broke me when I was reading his story was the sewage line.
The sewage line?
There's a main sewage line right outside his apartment building that has been, and I quote, under repair for 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. He says he sees workers there sometimes. They'll show up, move some dirt around with a shovel, put up some of that yellow caution tape, maybe sit around and smoke a cigarette for a few hours, and then leave. But the pipe never actually gets fixed.
So it's just a permanently open trench?
It's a permanently open trench of raw sewage in the capital city of a supposed superpower. And while he's literally stepping over this trench, making sure his N95 mask has a good seal, he's scrolling on his phone through news feeds about these hyper-efficient, high-tech hospitals in Singapore, or the bullet trains and lightning-fast infrastructure in East Asian hubs.
And that contrast,
right,
that must create such a profound sense of exhaustion. It's a psychological burden.
It's more than exhaustion. He describes it as a feeling that the term developing nation isn't a temporary status. It's a life sentence.
A life sentence of inefficiency.
Yeah. It feels like this invisible ceiling that no amount of personal grit or hard work can break through. He's doing everything right, but the system, the very environment he lives in, is fundamentally broken, and it's holding him back.
That phrase you just used, a life sentence of inefficiency, that really, really sticks with you. And this story, Arjun's story, is a perfect real-world illustration of what political scientists mean when they talk about state capacity.
Because it's a term we hear a lot, but what does it actually mean?
It's not about how big the government is, or how much money it spends, or how loud the political speeches are. At its core, state capacity is the basic ability of the state to deliver what are called public goods.
And public goods are things like working drains and clean air.
The things that the private market can't really provide for everyone on its own. You can't buy clean air just for your own bedroom if the entire city is choking in smog.
You can buy an air purifier, I guess.
You can, and we'll get to that. But you can't purify the sky. The state's primary job, if you go all the way back to the social contract philosophers like Locke and Hobbes, is the protection of life and the provision of a livable environment. If the air is toxic and the water is dirty and the sewage isn't managed, the state is failing at step one. It's failing its most basic function.
Okay, but here's the thing that I struggle to get my head around. We clearly have a powerful state in some respects. I mean, we can organize the largest elections on Earth, a logistical miracle. We can launch satellites to the south pole of the moon, something only a handful of nations have ever accomplished. If we can land a rover on the moon, why is Arjun still stepping over a broken sewage pipe in the capital city?
And that is the core of the paradox. That's what some scholars call the capability trap. The Indian state is what Lamp Pritchett, a development economist, famously called a flailing state.
A flailing state, like flailing its arms in the water, trying not to drown.
Imagine someone waving their arms wildly, splashing a lot of water, making a lot of noise, but not actually swimming forward. They're just flailing. The research behind this idea is fascinating. It suggests that the Indian state is incredibly proscriptive, but it consistently fails at being prescriptive.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me. Proscriptive versus prescriptive.
Yes. The Indian state is extremely powerful if it wants to stop you from doing something. That's prescriptive power.
The power of no.
The power of no. If you want to start a new factory, they can stop you with 50 different licenses and permits. If you want to move your money, they can block you with regulations. If the government wants to ban a book or shut down a movie or block something on the internet, they can do it overnight. The machinery to say no, to prohibit, is immense and very effective.
Okay, so the state's brakes work really, really well.
The brakes are world-class, top of the line. But prescriptive power is the opposite. It's the power to actually do things, to build the hospital and make sure it has doctors who show up, to lay the sewage pipe and ensure it's connected and flows properly, to clean the river.
The power of yes.
The power of yes, and here's how we'll do it. And that requires a completely different kind of machinery. It needs coordination between departments. It needs delegation of authority. It needs accountability at every level. And that is where the state flails. It's great at making rules, but terrible at building things.
So for Arjun, the state is this giant, powerful entity that demands his taxes, demands his compliance with a million rules. But when he asks for a basic service in return, a working drain, the state just sort of shrugs and looks away.
It doesn't just shrug. The metaphor used in one of these papers is that it ghost rides the machine.
Laughs ghost riding. Like the old hip-hop dance move where you get out of a moving car and dance on the hood?
Exactly. It's a perfect, if terrifying, metaphor for Indian governance. The government puts the car in drive. They'll pass a law. They'll announce a big mission like Swachh Bharat or Clean India. That's them putting the car in gear and pointing it down the road.
Okay.
Then the driver, the high-level administration, the ministers, they climb out the window to get on the roof and dance for the cameras. They're focused on the announcement, the headline, the PR. Meanwhile, the car is just rolling forward on its own momentum, but nobody is actually steering the wheel at the ground level.
Oh.
The local municipality, the contractor who got the bid, the inspector who's supposed to check the work, they aren't connected. There's no one ensuring the job gets done. The car is moving, but it's driverless.
That is a genuinely terrifying image. A car full of 1.4 billion people rolling down the highway with no one at the wheel. But, there's a darker layer to this crisis of capacity that we have to talk about. It's not just incompetence or ghostwriting. For some people, it feels like the car isn't just driverless. It feels like it's actively trying to run them over. I'm talking about the inequality aspect of this.
Yes. The hidden apartheid. This was a really tough section of the research to get through because we like to project this image of a unified republic, unity and diversity and all that. But the data on caste discrimination and its impact on access to these public goods it's just shocking.
The note I have here says a crime is committed against a Dalit, someone from a scheduled caste, every 20 minutes.
Every 20 minutes.
I just can't even process that number.
And that's just the reported crime. The deeper issue when we're talking about state capacity is the systematic exclusion from the very public goods we were just discussing.
Fast.
In many villages across the country, even today, Dalits are denied access to the main community water tank. They're told to use a separate, often less clean source. They can't enter certain houses or temples. There are still widespread accounts of manual scavenging people, almost always from Dalit communities, being forced to carry human waste by hand. This practice is technically banned, but it persists because the state lacks the capacity, or perhaps more accurately, the political will, to enforce the ban at the local level.
So how does this social fracture affect the machinery of the state? Does it just mean the state is biased in who it serves?
It means the state itself is fragmented. It's broken. You cannot have a unified, efficient republic if a significant portion of your population is systematically excluded from the very definition of the public. It's not just bias, it's a fundamental break in the system.
Explain that. What's the mechanism?
Okay, think about it at the village level. If a local village council, which is often dominated by upper castes, doesn't view the Dalit colony as fully part of their community or as fully human in some extreme cases, why would they prioritize fixing their water line?
They wouldn't.
They won't staff their local health clinic properly. They won't ensure the school teacher shows up. It breaks the feedback loop of democratic accountability. The state fails to deliver services not just because it's incompetent, but because for certain populations, it doesn't even try.
It reminds me of that stark comparison with China's health sector that was in the sources. The book, The Politics of Human Development, points out this massive divergence in strategy right after both countries became independent.
Right. It's a crucial point. Even before China became an economic giant back in the 50s and 60s, when they were just as poor, if not poorer than India, they did something radically different. They invested heavily in barefoot doctors.
Right.
They sent legions of minimally trained healthcare workers into the countryside. The focus wasn't on building fancy hospitals. It was on basic hygiene, vaccinations, and cutting infant mortality in the villages. They blanketed the country with basic public health.
And what was India's approach at the same time?
Our spending on health was lower as a percentage of GDP, but more importantly, it was urban-focused and curative, not preventative. We built big medical colleges and specialty hospitals in the cities to treat people who were already sick, while largely neglecting primary and preventative care in the rural areas where most of the population lived.
So the end result is the landscape we see today. A landscape where the rich in India just buy their way out of the state's failures.
Exactly. The elite have effectively seceded from the failures of the republic. If the air is bad, I buy a 20,000 rupee Dyson air purifier for every room. If the municipal water is dirty, I buy a sophisticated RO filter system for my kitchen. If the public hospital is broken and chaotic, I go to a private 5-star clinic.
And people like Arjun are left behind in that massive gap. He's not rich enough to build his own private, purified bubble, but he's too aware, too connected to the world to just accept his fate silently. He's trapped in the hazardous air quality zone, watching the state ghost ride the machine right past his broken sewage pipe.
It's a brutal trap to be in.
Ghost riding the machine. Man, that image is going to stay with me for a long time. But let's shift gears, because usually whenever you point out these fundamental failures, the sewage, the air, the broken hospitals, the counterargument is always the same. It's always the economy. Look at the GDP.
We're the fastest growing major economy in the world.
The stock market is at an all-time high. We're a $3 trillion economy on our way to 5.
And to be fair, you look at the screen and the numbers are right there. The last figures were, 8.2% growth? It looks incredibly impressive.
It looks world-beating. It looks like the engine is firing on all cylinders. But this brings us to our second story and our second major area of concern. I want to talk about a man named Rajesh. I found his account on an online forum for small business owners where they were discussing industrial challenges, and it really paints a completely different picture of this supposed economic boom.
Okay, what's Rajesh's reality?
So Rajesh runs a small to medium manufacturing unit near a major port. He makes precision auto components. Now, logically, if the national GDP is growing at over 8%, Rajesh's business should be drowning in orders. He should be running 3 shifts, buying a second factory, thinking about an IPO.
But he's not.
He's struggling just to stay afloat. And he points to 2 main reasons. First, load shedding.
Planned power cuts. The ghost of the 90s.
He's still very much alive. He has to shut down all his heavy machinery for 4 hours every single day because the state electricity grid can't handle the load. So he has to run these massive, expensive diesel generators, which completely kills his profit margin.
So his input costs are artificially high because of state failure. What's the second reason?
The port. He can see the port from his factory window. He says he watches his container of finished goods just sit there on the docks for weeks, sometimes over a month, because of customs red tape, waiting for some official to put a stamp on a piece of paper. Meanwhile, he knows his competitors in Vietnam or China are moving their goods from factory to ship in 48 hours.
So for him, nominal GDP is a ghost.
Nominal GDP is a ghost. He said, it doesn't buy diesel for my generator. It doesn't fix the potholed road that breaks the axles on my delivery trucks. It doesn't get my container onto that ship. He feels like he's living through a recession while the news channels are celebrating a historic boom.
And that's the disconnect we have to unpack.
So help me bridge this gap. Is Rajesh just an unlucky outlier, or is that 8.2% number? Oh, is it lying?
Lying is a very strong word, let's call it statistically massaged, or perhaps misleading if you don't know what you're looking at. There's a concept discussed in these economic reports called the deflator trick.
The deflator trick. Okay, that sounds like a magician's move.
It essentially is a kind of statistical sleight of hand. Okay, stick with me for a second here because this is the absolute key to understanding why your wallet might feel empty, even when the TV says the economy is soaring. To get this, we need to quickly understand the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP.
Okay.
Imagine you own a bakery. Last year, you sold 100 loaves of bread for $1 each. Your total revenue, your nominal GDP, is $100.
$100 in the bank.
Okay. This year, you sell the exact same 100 loaves of bread. You haven't actually grown, you haven't produced more, you haven't hired a new baker. But let's say the price of everything went up due to inflation, so you now sell each loaf for $1.10. Your revenue is now $110. Your nominal growth is 10% paper.
But I haven't actually made any more bread.
Exactly. Your real growth, the actual amount of stuff you produced, is 0. So real GDP is the number that's supposed to measure the actual stuff. The bread, the cars, the shirts, not just the changing price tags.
And how do they calculate that?
To get real GDP, you take the total money figure, the nominal GDP, and you subtract inflation. That subtraction process uses something called a deflator. Now, here is where the trick comes in. In India, for a lot of these key calculations, the inflation metric that's used for the deflator is heavily based on the wholesale price index, or WPI.
Okay, and what's been happening with wholesale prices?
For a while recently, they've been very, very low. Sometimes even negative because the global prices of raw materials like oil and steel came down.
If you have to subtract inflation to get the real number, And the inflation number you're using is tiny or even negative.
If you subtract a tiny number from a big number, the resulting real number looks huge. If you subtract a negative number, you're actually adding it, which makes the final number look even bigger. So because the inflation deflator was so low, it mathematically made the real GDP growth look massive, even if the underlying activity wasn't as strong.
So the 8.2% is, in part, a spreadsheet anomaly, a result of the formula.
A significant chunk of it, yes. The source material is very clear on this. It points out that if you look at other, more direct indicators of activity, they tell a different story. For instance, manufacturing output, the actual stuff Rajesh is making, was growing at a much more modest 4.8%, not the headline 8%.
And that explains the disconnect perfectly. Rajesh looks at the news and sees India booming at 8%. Then he looks at his actual order book and thinks, am I going crazy? Am I living in a different country?
He's living in what one of the reports calls the C-grade reality.
C-grade, what does that mean?
It's a direct reference to the IMF. The International Monetary Fund actually conducted a technical review of India's national accounts data, and they gave it a C grade.
They gave the country's economic data a C. Good.
It's not good. They flagged several major issues, but one of the biggest was that we are using an outdated base year for our calculations. We are measuring our 21st century economy based on a basket of goods and services from the year 2011-2012.
2011. Wait, that's ancient history in economic terms? I don't think I even had a smartphone in 2011. There was no UPI payment system. There was no widespread 4G. There was no gig economy to speak of.
It's like trying to measure the speed of a Tesla using a wind-up stopwatch from the 1950s. The tool is wrong for the job. You're completely missing the massive structural changes in the economy, especially in the digital and informal sectors. And crucially, if there's distress in the informal sector where the vast majority of Indians actually work, the data might not capture it properly because it's so heavily weighted towards big listed companies.
So you end up with a superpower headline on the news, but a struggling reality for millions of people like Rajesh.
And this brings us right back to that painful historical comparison with the Asian tigers. We have this source from the scholar Shailendra Sharma, and he compares the economic trajectories of India and South Korea. And the timeline, when you lay it out, is just heartbreaking.
What was the starting point?
In 1960, India and South Korea had roughly the same per capita income.
The same starting line in the race.
Same. Today, South Korea's per capita income is more than 10 times higher than India's. 10 times.
Oh. How is a gap like that even possible? How do they diverge so much so fast? The common narrative you always hear is about free markets. South Korea opened up its economy and India stayed socialist and closed.
That's the simple myth, but the reality the research shows is much more complex. It wasn't just free markets. South Korea had what's called a governed market. The state didn't just step back and let things happen. It actively guided the market. It was a tiger state. It picked winners. It said, we are going to dominate global shipbuilding. And it threw all its resources and policy support behind that goal until it happened.
And India, meanwhile, became the lame elephant.
The lame elephant, yes. Because of the license raj, the bureaucracy choked everything. But even after the 1991 reforms, the sources argue that the old mindset persisted in what's called the Iron Triangle. It's the nexus of politicians, bureaucrats, and certain business interests. And this triangle often prioritizes what economists call rent-seeking over genuine value creation.
Rent-seeking.
In simple terms, it's getting rich not by building a better product or a more efficient factory, but by manipulating the system to your advantage. It's getting a special license, a government contract through connections, or a favorable regulation passed. It's about extracting wealth from the system, not creating new wealth.
So in South Korea, if you were a businessman and you wanted government help, you had to prove you could compete and export to the world. You had to perform.
Yes, there were strict performance metrics. In India, for a long time, you just had to know the right person in the right ministry. That was the key to success.
Which means Rajesh's cargo is stuck at the port, not because of some unavoidable act of nature, but because the system itself isn't designed for maximum efficiency. It's designed to create choke points where signatures, fees, and delays can be extracted.
And that's why the physical output numbers are so different, which is what really matters. In the mid-1980s, India exported about $5 billion worth of industrial goods. South Korea, starting from the same point, exported $24.5 billion.
Oh, that's a five-fold difference.
That gap, That missing $20 billion in physical goods is the entire story. It's the difference between Rajesh struggling to pay his diesel bill for the generator and his Korean counterpart building a global empire.
It's so frustrating because you can see the potential is right there. We all feel it. But if the economy is the engine and the state is the mechanic who's fumbling with the tools, we now have to talk about the driver. We have to talk about the people. This brings us to what is, for me, the most sensitive and maybe the most critical part of this whole deep dive: human capital, the knowledge trap.
I agree. This is the one that really keeps me up at night because, you can fix a broken road, you can rewrite a bad tax law. But if you waste the potential of an entire generation of young people, that takes decades to fix. The damage is profound.
So I want to introduce our third and final story. I read about a young woman named Priya. She's a recent graduate with a degree in engineering from a college in Bengaluru, the country's tech hub.
Okay, so on paper, that sounds like a classic success story.
Perfect. In her home village, she was an absolute star, the first person in her family to get a professional title. Her parents likely poured their entire life savings into her college fees, thinking it was a golden ticket.
The dream of so many families.
Absolutely. But when she moved to the city for work, she hit a brick wall. She went to these job interviews at tech companies, and they would ask her to do very basic things: write a simple piece of code, solve a structural logic problem, debug a program.
And she couldn't do it.
She just froze. She told the researcher that in that moment, she realized her expensive engineering degree was essentially just a piece of decorative paper. Her entire education, from kindergarten to college, had been one long 13-year exercise in rote memorization and obedience.
She could recite formulas from the textbook?
She could write down definitions word for word, but she couldn't think. She couldn't apply the knowledge. She couldn't problem solve. She couldn't debug. She realized she was part of what one of the sources calls a mass-produced workforce. Not educated, but produced.
And that is the absolute tragedy of Priya's story. She did everything right. She played by the rules of the system. She studied hard, paid the fees, got the degree. And when she got to the end, she found the door to the future was locked from the inside.
And this isn't just one sad anecdote. We have a quote in our notes here from Sabir Bhatia, the guy who co-founded Hotmail. He did not mince his words on this topic. He said, and I quote, "We are producing an army of useless kids."
An army of useless kids. But you understand the frustration behind it. He's talking about the mindset that the system creates. He compares the education system in the West, where, for instance, a child writes a story with spelling and grammar errors, and the teacher praises the creativity and the imagination.
Right, they focus on the idea.
They focus on the idea. In India, he says, that same child is punished for the mistakes. The red pen comes out. The focus is on conformity and getting the answer exactly right as it appears in the textbook.
It's the compliance versus creativity battle. We are relentlessly training kids to obey, to memorize, and to regurgitate information on command for an exam.
And the hard data on this is absolutely terrifying. There was a bombshell study conducted by researchers at Stanford University. They compared electrical engineering students in India, China, Russia, and the US. They tracked the same group of students over their entire 4 years of university to see how their critical thinking skills developed.
Okay, that's fascinating. What did they find?
They found that the Indian students made, on average, no gains in critical thinking over the 4 years.
They went to engineering college for 4 years, supposedly the prime of their intellectual development, and they didn't get any better at thinking critically.
Correct. In fact, for a significant portion of the students, their critical thinking skills actually declined over the 4 years.
Possible.
Okay. For comparison, the Russian and Chinese students started out way ahead in terms of raw math and physics knowledge. The U.S. students started lower on that front, but they made significant gains in critical thinking and problem-solving skills over the 4 years. The Indian students started with decent knowledge, but just flatlined on the thinking part.
That one study explains so much. It explains that other statistic we have, that something like 80% of Indian engineering graduates are not fit for jobs in the modern knowledge economy.
Exactly. We have the quantity. We churn out hundreds of thousands of engineers a year, but the quality is profoundly lacking, and the infrastructure is broken. Look at the pupil-teacher ratio in these colleges. It's 33 students for every one teacher. We have a shortage of something like 76,000 qualified engineering professors in the country.
You can't teach critical thinking and Socratic debate in a lecture hall with 100 students where the professor is just reading off of PowerPoint slides and the students are mindlessly copying notes. But this raises the big civilizational question. India is the land that invented the concept of zero. We had Nalanda University, a global center of learning 1,000 years before Oxford or Cambridge. We have this deep, rich history of debate, of logic, of mathematics. How did we end up with this broken rote learning factory?
To answer that, you have to look at history. One of our sources, a book called Beyond Macaulay, points the finger directly at the colonial legacy, specifically at an influential British administrator named Thomas Macaulay. In 1835, he designed the education system that, in its basic structure, we still use today.
The famous Minute on Indian Education.
That's the one. And Macaulay was very, very explicit about his goals. He didn't want to create innovators. He didn't want to create scientists or philosophers or entrepreneurs who might one day challenge the British Empire.
He wanted clerks.
He wanted clerks. His exact words were that he wanted to create a class of people who were Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. He wanted brown sahibs, people who could translate English, push paper through the bureaucracy, and, most importantly, follow orders without question.
So the system was literally designed from the ground up to encourage obedience and discourage critical questioning of authority.
It was its primary design feature. It was a factory for producing cogs for the bureaucratic machine of the empire. And the tragedy is that when the British left in 1947, we didn't change the software. We kept the factory running. We expanded it. We built thousands more schools and colleges, but we didn't fundamentally change the underlying operating system. We are still mass-producing clerks for an empire that hasn't existed for 75 years.
And you contrast that with the ancient Gurukul or Vidyapith systems that the article mentions.
Which were all about holistic learning. Debate, logic, mathematics, philosophy, understanding the inner world and the outer world. We traded that rich heritage for a system that asks only one question. Can you memorize this textbook for the exam?
And the ultimate cost of that trade is Priya. She's the victim. She's the human cost of a 19th century colonial design that has been allowed to fester and decay in the 21st century.
And in a global economy that is increasingly running on innovation, on AI, on complex problem solving, on creativity, that is a profoundly dangerous place to be. If your entire workforce can only follow instructions but can't debug the code or solve the novel structural problem, they are liable to be replaced by an algorithm that can follow instructions better than any human.
Okay, so let's try to pull these threads together. We have a state that is flailing and ghostwriting the machine. That's Arjun's story. We have an economy that is, in some ways, inflating its own grades. That's Rajesh's story. And we have an education system that is stuck in the 1800s, producing degrees without skills. That's Priya's story.
This feels, well, it feels heavy. I want to zoom out for this final part of our deep dive and ask about the root cause. Why? Why is it like this? Why did China and other East Asian countries diverge so sharply from us on these fronts?
This is the really uncomfortable part of the analysis, because it suggests the problem isn't just about bad policies. It's about a foundational ideology. Yep. One of our sources, a book by Devin Joshi, directly compares the political ideologies of post-independence India and China, and it finds a stark, fundamental difference in how the ruling elites viewed the...
In what way? Well, let's take China first. Now, we have to acknowledge the immense cruelty and the lack of freedom of the authoritarian system. That's not in dispute. But the Chinese Communist Party had a foundational ideology of, in theory, egalitarianism and, crucially, mass mobilization. In the 50s and 60s, they forced literacy campaigns. They sent those barefoot doctors we talked about into the remotest villages.
Why? Was it out of the kindness of their hearts? I doubt it.
It was cold, hard strategy. They viewed a healthy, literate peasant not as a burden, but as a strategic asset for the state. They needed a productive workforce to build the nation, to fight wars, to strengthen the party. So they invested in the basic hardware of the human being, health and education.
And India's approach was different.
The term used to describe India is a soft state. Our democracy, while incredibly valuable in so many ways, was dominated by an elite, often upper caste, that didn't necessarily view the masses as a strategic asset to be developed in the same way. There was a sense of deep-seated social hierarchy. The plan wasn't mass mobilization, the plan was trickle down.
The trickle-down fallacy. It just keeps coming up.
It's central to the story. The idea in India was, let's build heavy industry, let's build a few elite institutions like the IITs for the top tier of society, and eventually, over many decades, the benefits and wealth will trickle down to the poor. East Asia did the complete opposite.
They started from the bottom up.
They started from the bottom up. They said, let's fix the people first. Let's make everyone literate and healthy first. And then that healthy, educated workforce will be the fuel that drives our industrialization.
That is a massive fundamental difference in national strategy. One approach builds the foundation first, the other tries to build the penthouse on a shaky foundation and just hopes it doesn't collapse.
And that soft state issue, that lack of urgency, it trickles down into the bureaucracy we see today. We've all heard the term steel frame to describe the Indian Administrative Service, the IAS, but some critics in these papers now call it the steel frame.
Because of corruption.
It's not just corruption, it's also absenteeism and a lack of accountability. We have some of the highest rates of teacher and doctor absenteeism in the entire world. In some states, studies have found that 40% of government doctors don't show up to their assigned clinics on any given day.
40%.
They're on the government payroll, but they are not in the building serving the public. They're often running a private practice on the side.
But here's the ultimate paradox, and the source material points this out so brilliantly. Everyone wants a government job. It's the most sought-after career path for millions.
And that is the governance paradox. Everyone wants a government job for the salary, the security, the power, the pension. The source calls it an adorable salary. But almost no one who has a choice wants to use government services.
Right. You want the government job, but you send your own kid to a private school. You want the government salary, but you and your family go to a private hospital.
It shows a complete and utter lack of faith in the very system that people are dedicating their lives to joining. It creates this bizarre, closed loop of incentives where the goal is to extract from the state a secure living, not to serve the public through the state.
And that brings us full circle back to the question you asked right at the beginning. Is the machinery broken, or have we just forgotten how to run it? And it sounds like the evidence suggests the machinery itself, the colonial-era bureaucracy, the rote-learning education system, the prescriptive power of no, was designed for a different era and a completely different purpose. It was never designed for the rapid, equitable growth of 1.4 billion people.
I think that's a fair conclusion. It's not just that we're bad drivers. We're trying to win a Formula One race with a 19th century steam tractor.
Here. We spent the last hour painting a picture that is, let's be honest, quite bleak. With the superpower software, the UPI payment system, the space missions, the brilliant billionaire CEOs, and it's trying to run on failed republic hardware, the broken sewage pipes, the rote learning, the deep-seated caste divides.
It is a bleak picture, and we can't shy away from that, but I think there are glimmers of hope. The very fact that we're having this conversation, that these critical reports are being written, that the IMF is grading the data, it means the problems are at least becoming visible. And you can't begin to fix a problem that you refuse to see.
And there are reforms mentioned in the sources. The new education policy, or NEP, is at least talking about critical thinking and multidisciplinary learning, even if the implementation on the ground is painfully slow.
Right. And you have to look at where the global money is going. The CEO of Blackstone, one of the largest investment firms in the world, recently called India the fastest growing major economy and their best market. He's putting billions of dollars where his mouth is. Why? Because the raw potential is undeniably real.
He sees the full tank of fuel.
He sees the full tank. The demographic dividend of a young population is still there, waiting to be unlocked. If you can just turn the screw on efficiency by 10 or 20%, the explosion in growth and value would be massive.
So it's like the car is stalled, but the tank is full of high-octane fuel.
Exactly. The question is the spark. Can the state finally shift its focus from being prescriptive, from banning and blocking, to being prescriptive, to building and enabling? Can we shift our education system's focus from memorizing to thinking?
And maybe most fundamentally, can we shift our view of the average citizen from a subject to be managed and controlled to a national asset to be nurtured and invested in?
That is the entire ballgame shift. Because if you see Arjun as a strategic asset, you fix his heir. If you see Priya as a strategic asset, you fix her curriculum. It all flows from there.
So we return to that intersection, the boy selling the flag, the driver spitting on the road. It's easy to blame the driver. It's easy to blame the politician. But the deeper rot is in the acceptance of the brokenness. We've become comfortable with the Chalta high attitude, celebrating the survival of our people despite the system, rather than demanding a system that helps them thrive. The question isn't whether India will grow. It will. The question is, will it grow as a unified, capable republic, where an Arjun or a Priya can actually breathe and think? Or will we remain a nation of islands, luxury SUVs, floating in a sea of gray haze? As one observer noted, we have principles that are breathtaking, but a practice that is, for many, excruciating. Perhaps it's time we stopped admiring the principles on paper and started fixing the engine.